So because we're already starting a bit late, I'll just start and our other members will join us and share. So I know that I'm calling the Education Committee meeting of January 14th, 2019. So thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us. Our agenda is our Assistant Superintendent's report. So again, I welcome you. If you have any housekeeping things, phones you have to keep on, times you have to leave early, you can share that or not.
All right, thank you very much. The Assistant Superintendent Monthly Report this month starts out with site celebrations, and really I just wanted to pick all of our sites. There's amazing holiday celebrations that we went around and were able to witness. Students and staff worked very hard to put these together, and it was really, really exciting to see the different holiday programs. A lot of singing, a lot of music, just an absolute job by all of our sites. So thank you to all the people, the staff, the students, and community members that made those events possible. So thank you very much for that. Continuing on with our site walkthroughs. So we do walkthroughs at sites throughout the school year. Lowell Elementary, Merritt Creek Academy, and the ALC and AEO program were the most recent sites to be visited. At these sites we saw lots of student engagement, lots of learning. We saw evidence of positive behavior interventions and supports. We saw school-wide expectations, learning targets in classrooms, and saw some staff doing amazing things with kids, and just really strong environments for student learning. And it was really exciting to see our staff and our students working to make that happen. Next I have safety updates. So we do have a series of grant updates, ALICE updates. We applied, just to refresh everybody's memory, we did have 2 grants that we applied for in regard to school safety. One was a federal grant called the COPS grant. The other was a state grant. We were awarded the state grant at 2 sites, and then we also received a federal grant which will cover all sites. We're continuing to move forward with through the different processes of those grants, and as we move into the summer, we'll be looking to do improvements for our access to our buildings and really making our schools as safe as they can be. The great news from some of the grants, again, was that we did see a lot of, and the state grant anyway, we didn't qualify for that because we do have a lot of amazing safety measures already in place, so that's a good thing. But areas where we can still continue to improve to make things better will be covered under the federal COPS grant and the state grant for the 2 sites that were awarded, and we'll continue with that work. In addition to school safety, we're continuing with our implementation of ALICE. We're making some great progress in that. We have a wonderful team working on that team, or working to make that happen. We have done a scenario training back in October, as well as an e-learning module for all of our staff. Additional things we're moving forward to is we'll be sending out a parent letter in the near future to inform the community on what that is. We'll also be hosting some parent nights, so parents will have an opportunity to come and learn about ALICE and ask questions. We're continuing to have conversations about community ed training, working with our coaches as part of their emergency plans and our athletic directors, and what would happen there, and continuing ongoing training and support for our staff. We will slowly be rolling this out with students, and it'll be phased in over a period of time, so they're able to learn the proper procedures on how to respond in the new strategy of ALICE that we've adopted. Lastly, I just want to give a shout out to the Duluth Community School Collaborative. They've been doing just an amazing job. I'm new to serving with them, and I've really just watched them just come together over the last couple months and really focus on kids and how can we best meet the needs of our students. And it's been really the amount of passion of the people that are involved there is really impressive, and I'm just excited that we as a school district have them as a partner in supporting student achievement and really bringing that community school focus to all of our schools. So we currently have Myers, Wilkins, Lincoln, and Denfeld, and it's a great start, and it'll be really exciting to continue that partnership in the future and see many wonderful things to come with them. That is the end of my report.
I have a question.
Yep.
So I was looking today for work purposes about some of the House bills that have already been introduced in St. Paul, and one of them is around extreme safety or extreme school safety or something like that. It was introduced by somebody from the Twin Cities. Are you monitoring that? And if so, could we, at some point, could we get an update on what that could potentially look like? I can email you the information if you want, but the wording was really strong, so I wasn't sure if that was on your radar.
I haven't seen that that bill yet, or that bill language yet. I'm kind of predicting that there will be quite a few bills on safety, and so if you can send that to me, that'd be great. Otherwise, we will be monitoring the bills as they come up. We get updates from, MASA and MSBA and MASBO, MSBO, yeah, and other organizations that help keep tabs on that, and also which ones are kind of getting legs and going farther, so that we can be watching the ones that are getting the most traction, because sometimes there's 20 or 30 educational bills, and unless we're keeping track on which ones are being discussed in committee or which are going forward, we can spend a lot of time on bills that aren't necessarily going anywhere. We did talk to a few lobbyists today too, and we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow, about getting some support to be able to better do that.
Member Sandstead.
Thank you. Assistant Superintendent Horton, I was going to ask, related to the Duluth Community School Collaborative, I know they'd had some change in positions or folks. I'm wondering if they are now fully staffed, or, can you give us a little update on that from what you know?
I can provide some information. So currently, they were operating without an executive director. In the interim, that's really kind of the support that I've seen from the team over there, is that everybody has kind of chipped in and stepped up to really make sure that things were continued forward. There was things left in good order in terms of some processes and next steps that need to be happened, and so the board has really dug into that. Kathy Bogan has been huge in that process and in serving that role. She has a lot of experience with the collaborative, so she brought a lot of that historical piece, was able to really kind of understand kind of some of the directional pieces, and I don't think it's official or anything, but I know that there has been some, where there's looking at an interim director position, and I think that she would probably be a very strong candidate for that. But the board has not met to make any decisions that I'm aware of.
And Member Loeffler-Kemp.
I want to go back to Member Trinka's comments about legislative stuff and just remind folks that the School Board Association has a weekly update, and I've always found that really helpful for kind of finding out about new bills and tracking other things. And I know both Member Oswald and I, when we were at the delegate assembly, that they really highlighted some of the safety bills that they're going to be focused on. So maybe if we all can collectively look at that too and see if what you described appears on anything. So thanks for bringing that up.
Assistant Superintendent Horton, do you have a comment? No? Yes?
I did not. I just turned off my microphone.
Okay, that's okay. I'm going to ask you a question back about, so you commented under Alice updates that we're going to phase in with students. So what are we currently doing? Are we still then, I think there's still the state statute that says we need 5 lockdowns in a school year. So what are we doing there?
That's a great question. And Alice does not replace the need to still have a potential lockdown. There are times when that might make sense as a strategy. For an active shooter, that we've learned through research that is not necessarily the best practice. So we still do 5 drills, but the Alice training is incorporated into that. So, for example, in Alice, you have really 3 basic responses. One is to still continue to lock down, but they called it an enhanced lockdown and would be more of a barricade. So in a barricade situation, if you're in a classroom with one exit, you might barricade the doors, put desks in front of there, different pieces like that. Part of the training that we'll be rolling out with students is how that looks maybe at different levels. Because of people's ability to respond based on a high school student versus somebody who's in kindergarten. The other strategies would be to run away. Our practices will change in how we do that, and we'll be much more clear. We don't use code words. If there is an active threat or shooter in the entryway, we would say exactly where that is, and if you're nowhere near that, then let's get you out of there. Let's keep you safe. And the other one is to distract, and so that might be, if there was an active threat, we do some training on how you can distract and increases your chances to be safety. So that would all count towards those 5 drills, and we still continue to do those.
We'll move forward then with Curriculum Director Netlin's report.
Thank you. The first thing I have on my report for you tonight is staff development. And this is an update. I think it was about 2 months ago, a team went to the PK3 Regional Leadership Summit. And it's a 3-part series, so the second part is coming up next month. Next week. And so a team is going to be going to that. I'm going to be a part of it. As you can see from the focus, it's about aligning curriculum, assessments, and instruction. So definitely up my alley, and I'm excited to work with that team. We've been having conversations about connecting our early learning and our K-3 programming. So it's exciting thinking about that. Then there's also another piece of that in the spring coming up, so you'll hear a tidbit on that in the future as well. Then something that happened just last week that was really exciting. One of the areas I oversee, in addition to other things, is immersion. And so we had an immersion family night at Lowell last week, and the principal there, Jen, and the whole immersion programming team were phenomenal, providing information to parents and answering questions and getting them some of the research around immersion and just helping people make an informed decision on if immersion is a good fit for their child, and then provided applications and things like that. And I was there too to answer questions, and it was really fun to see such a packed house and so many people excited about immersion programming. So even had a parent who was wondering, can I do both? So it was fun to have that question. And then my last piece is curriculum update, and this one has been a long time in progress. So last month we had 3 finalist texts that I shared with you from the committee looking at text replacement, and the committee reached a decision. Spirit Car is the text that we're going to be moving forward with. So we're excited about that, and really the work starts now. So we've got the planning pieces working on unit design and going to take kind of a slow implementation with this. And so we're going to focus on grade level benchmarks and a common assessment and do some trial and figuring out what's going to be kind of good approaches in this new text. And then we're going to have some time in June to come back together and do a unit revision. So we're not wanting to just do it once and then put it in place. We're planning some time in advance to do some revision and refining of that. And that is all I have.
Member Oswald.
Thank you. I celebrate Spirit Car. I have heard good things about it. And I imagine our Indigenous communities are happy that we're going to take on a book with that kind of storytelling in it. Unfortunately, I'm involved with the NAACP Education Committee also, and I know that they're concerned that this is going to be looked at as taking away one of the small pieces of Black history that we do offer from To Kill a Mockingbird, and now where is that African descent piece going to be included? And so how can we satisfy all these cultural communities and rather than pitting them, they kind of view it as pitting it against each other, you know, the indigenous community versus the African heritage community. So.
Yeah, good question. So that's one of the things we actually wrestled with when making the decision, because part of the frustration is when we're only adopting one text, we can't adopt everything, and we know by choosing something, we're not choosing something else, and that doesn't feel good for anyone. And that came up in our community comments and our teacher comments, parent. I mean, it was obvious that that doesn't feel good, and we're not doing a massive adoption right now, right? We're talking about one text. And so one of the things we were talking about in unit design, and we're brainstorming right now, we haven't fully fleshed it out, that's coming later. But one of the things we talked about was focusing a little bit more on theme. And one of the themes in this text that really stands out is the idea of identity and what goes into a person's identity. So rather than focusing solely on this text, it's important, but focusing on the broader idea of identity, and then looking at bringing in some other supplemental texts alongside this, so that students can also explore what goes into identity makeup, which is very appropriate for a ninth grader. Who am I? Where do I come from? That kind of thing. And so looking at using kind of that lens on this as we move forward.
And I had posed the question of, you know, maybe in the future and moving forward, it might be possible maybe to explore having different courses in different cultural literature, like literature of African descent or literature of indigenous descent, and those kinds of offerings. I don't know how you brainstorm those kinds of things, but that comment went over well. But sure. You know, it's about expanding opportunity, and that's what we try to do. So, just something to consider. The other question that did come up is with the elimination of Huckleberry Finn in 11th grade. Is there a replacement text for that, or how is that vacancy of that book being handled?
Yeah, so with this one, it was one of a list of choices that were required. So every teacher didn't have to decide to teach that one. The wording is you have to teach at least 3 of these 6 titles, and Huckleberry Finn was one of those 6. So for this year, we said teach 3 of the 5 and just remove that one and it was an easy fix compared to the other text.
Okay.
So within that, we have some texts that teachers are looking at for 11th grade, just as a starting reading point to add back to that list of 6, but we're moving slower on that just simply because it's less urgent.
Member Sandstead?
I appreciate all the work that has gone into that process, and all of the feedback that you've received and integrated, and that you're going to continue to move forward and make progress with the curriculum. My question is related to the immersion programs.
Yes.
We discussed a while back, you and I, that there was perhaps a need for some planning about continuation, what's going to happen when our Masabikang 4th graders now get into 5th grade, and what happens beyond. And so I'm wondering if you've made plans to make plans, or how we can support you in that moving forward, what you need from us.
Sure. I can answer the plans piece first, and I'll have to think about the second one. As far as planning, we have regular monthly immersion meetings where myself, the building principal, both program coordinators, Office of Equity, we get together and we do planning and troubleshooting. And we've got a plan started in writing down, but part of that was figuring out what does our plan need to have in it. We've been doing some work with that. More to come. As far as planning ahead, definitely thinking about what does immersion look like in middle school, and then how do we plan for that is definitely next on the list here once we get through the registration piece with start of school year. So yes, thinking about that. I'll need to think a little bit more about what specifically we need for support, but thinking troubleshooting middle school transition would definitely be a part of it.
I just want to comment that I had the same question with Huck Finn, and so thanks for that comment too. I think it's really important, or it's just really eye-opening to have Director Netland talk about the fact that when the 9th graders use Spirit Car, and I know that you're in the plans for the unit, but if the theme is identity, most teachers are going to develop a multi-genre type of approach to that, and that's just just an excellent example of what happens in the classroom that we don't always see, is that if the theme is identity, then even for me, the old English teacher, I'm going, oh, there's poetry by African Americans, there's song lyrics, there's short stories, there's other outside reading that will be brought in to make it a really complete unit. So I think that's an interesting, I think that needs to be vocalized out in the community, that we pick Spirit Car, but as teachers, we broaden that scope and bring in other genres to kind of broaden that unit. So that's a good thing. And identity, that's just ripe with creativity and projects and things that the kids will get excited about. Spirit Car might not be their exciting novel, maybe, although it's doable. The length is doable. I applaud you for even looking at that when you're looking at a new unit. And again, the idea to come back together in June is great as well. So I hope that our outlying communities will see. The other thing that I think what might be interesting, I'm not going to put any more work on you, and so that's not what my intent is, but there are opportunities in 9th through 12th grade for multicultural writers and poets and narratives, and they all woven in from 9th grade to 12th grade. Our high school students in the English curriculums get a wide spectrum of genres, wide spectrum of cultures, and so just this is just one little slice. To Kill a Mockingbird was one slice. There is many opportunities throughout 9th through 12th grade for our students to be exposed to the civil rights movement through literature, to be given different time frames from the 1800s, before the 1800s, through our current time frame. So there's lots of opportunity for lots of learning and lots of cultures to be represented. So we're moving forward. Thank you. Member Trinka.
Thank you. I just want to piggyback off of what Nora said and really encourage us to put some really thoughtful consideration into how we pursue the immersion programs moving into middle school. I was really lucky to go to an immersion school when I was educated in ISD 709, and it really did shape the trajectory of my academic career, and I think we didn't have access to it in middle school, so there's how hard it is to get started again. And I think it's a huge draw for our district, and I think if we can show that we're pushing it through middle school and then on into high school, I think that'll only continue to be a benefit for the district. So I'd like to echo what Member Sandstead said and encourage us to be really thoughtful and deliberate about that planning.
Member Loeffler-Kemp.
Yeah, I wanted to also talk about the immersion school for a minute. Is there plans to go look at, like we did before we started the immersion program? Some of us toured some schools down in the Twin Cities, and so to see a middle school version of it and have conversations with some of those schools about the transition going from elementary to middle school. I found that was one of the first things I got to do as a board member, and I just learned a lot, and I know it was helpful to the committee of people at the time.
Sure. Mm-hmm. There are not plans currently in place to do it with a date and time, but we have talked about it. Yeah.
Maybe if we knew what middle schools had them, for those of us who are going to be at the MSBA conference this week, we could make it a point to try and track somebody down from one of those school boards and ask them some questions. So if we could maybe get a list of what districts have immersion programs at the middle school level.
That's a good question. I can look into it.
And then whichever board member finds someone first gets a gold star or Hershey Kiss or something.
I've got chocolate-covered caramels in my office, if that works.
Other questions or feedback? Thank you, Director Netlin. Good job. Nice report. We then continue on with our education committee. We've got some grant applications. You've looked over those. Are there any questions on our grant applications? There's 3 of them. Then we're going on to our externally sponsored trip notifications, and I actually see two of them, but I think they're in two different places. Do I see that? No? Extended trip request and then externally sponsored trip notification different? Okay, go for it.
I can clarify that. The externally sponsored trip notification is a sign that this is an outside company that is providing this. They're taking on the liability, the planning. It's not a school activity. The other, the extended field trip, that is a school activity, and so that is our responsibility.
So any questions about the externally sponsored trip notification? We'll approve those then on Tuesday. Under action items now, I'm going to turn it, oh, yep.
I did want to clarify on this that you see that Mr. Kruger is listed. He is doing that as an employee of the travel company, not as an employee of the school district.
Okay.
It's a separate contract that they do often in the summer or over breaks.
I have a question. I don't know if this is appropriate, but I'll ask it anyway. It's always been on my mind as a coach. Is there a policy at all that that suggests that trips not be taken over state tournament dates that our school is involved in, or not? And that goes for internally or externally?
No, I don't remember ever having any conversations about that. I would say that is probably good planning for folks to check out what might be going on, but typically when they're making extended trip plans, it's not known whether the team would be in the state tournament or not, unless we were so bold as to presume.
Obviously, I have a history with that, because the state speech tournaments are almost always somewhere couched within our spring breaks in April. And that's traditionally where our internal music or language and it is hard. It's hard for our students that are on an individual type of activity like track or speech, if they're going to make it to the state tournament. And when they do, and they've already made the down payment to go to the music or to the language trip during the spring break, it always gets to be a sad thing for a coach to let go of. But because I noticed that the orchestra trip is over our spring break week, which is also the Minnesota State High School League state speech tournament. But okay. Let's move on to our action item that is our calendar that just needs to be revisited.
So upon approval of the calendar, and after we were moving forward, we realized that there was an error. Does anybody happen to know how you determine when Thanksgiving happens, besides Googling it? It is the 4th. So because November 1st is on a Friday, that pushed it back a week. So that was why we had an error in our calendar. And we ran it by, I don't know how many sets of eyes, but we all missed it. So the only revision being made is we're actually going to put the Thanksgiving holiday recess on Thanksgiving. We thought that the community would appreciate that. Unless there's any objections.
Member Oswald.
I'm not objecting to that.
Okay.
I just want to make the comment because I have gotten a lot of feedback from various teachers that they are very unhappy with the last day being the Monday in June. So I voiced it. There you go.
Just to clarify, there's the same amount of school days. It's just that their last day is on a Monday instead of on a Friday. Is that correct?
We tried to find any and all ways to go about not making that happen. And there was some uniqueness with when the dates fell this year. We also have a 29 days in February as well for this calendar. So there was a lot of different pieces in there. So as we tried to look at how we would do that, it really would have created a lot of changes to other areas in order to make that adjustment. So we did talk about it to but we weren't able to do it for this year. It's just kind of one of those years. And we went back and looked at, I believe, at some historical calendars as well, and I think there was historically a time where this happened too, probably a similar type of year. Correct, yes. So we haven't reduced any.
Member Loeffler-Kim.
Yeah, would you just share just the whole process that you used to review the calendar? And I know a lot of time has been put into this, and a lot of folks have, you've gotten feedback from a lot of different stakeholders, but if you would just review that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the process works is we start out with, well, first of all, we have to make sure we're following the law. So it's always going back and looking at the amount of days and the hours and making sure that all those pieces are fitting. In addition to that, we bring together stakeholder groups of teacher representation, paraprofessional representation, administrative building level representation, and district administration. And then we go through a process of discussing the different dates, what it is we're hoping to accomplish with those things. We take a look at what's kind of worked and not worked. We form a few different draft versions of that and continue to review that as a team and meet on that. Once that is in place and we feel like we have a good working progress, a good process or a good product in place, we then bring that forward to this committee for feedback. And if no feedback or changes is needed, then we move forward and approve at the board level.
Superintendent Grantset.
I just wanted to point out that another one of the challenges with next year is where the holiday of Christmas falls and Christmas Eve, because typically we would go to school through the 23rd, which would mean that we would just be in school for Monday and then be off for the holiday. And so to avoid coming to school on that Monday, it turned out to be the Monday in the summer.
I just want to make a comment as a former teacher that as much as we all anticipate summer vacation, we do celebrate it, and on that last day, we do have a lot of record keeping, a lot of parties, a lot of farewells and goodbyes. So coming back on a Monday, for my experience, has been, it's okay. You get to come in jeans and be kind of casual, and a lot of times there's not as much work to get done if you've used oftentimes your weekend, which you'd probably use if school was done even on Friday, because grades don't have to be done until Tuesday, and so there's all kinds of things. So as just a former teacher, we celebrate how important the end of the year is, and our last day is our last day, whether it's a Friday or a Monday, and we are ready to celebrate our summer, but also have celebrated a great school year. So I think we'll adjust. So moving along too with our community or our education committee, I will move to our resolutions. We have two of them. Just look them over. It's a resolution of just accepting grants, which we're really appreciative of, and a resolution about the school board accepting the Minnesota State High School League Foundation. Are there questions on the resolutions? Member Sandstead.
Yes, the Lloyd K. Johnson Foundation Award for Pathways to Teaching looks great. Is that covering the sort of gap in having two teachers at Denfeld this year?
Yes, it covers the cost of having the second teacher in this section.
Through the whole school year?
The second semester, yep.
Okay, cool. Very cool.
I just have a question a little bit on the resolution for the Minnesota State High School League Foundation, just because in our packet was very little, it was just the form, and I didn't see any clarification of what the amount was, and is this a grant that we've never gotten before, and what school is it awarded to? Is it just a standard grant that we've...
This is a grant application. It's not an acceptance.
Yes.
I believe that this is something that we have done yearly, and it goes to support participation fees. Right, and I think this is a brand new form because it looks different than the ones that we've had in the past. They've been school specific in the past, and maybe they've gone to district wide, but we can get more information for you on that. If you'd
I'm
like.
sorry, I could have emailed you about that. I had questions because really it then goes into that this is specific for students, faculty members, officials, and others. And so I didn't know, I mean, I know the grants that come in, the Minnesota State High School League does give back money to the high schools per their free and reduced lunch kind of allocation. There's a formula for that. But this says to assist school districts in providing seminars, training opportunities, or support for specific schools' functions for students, faculty members, officials, and others who are involved in athletic and fine arts program. So it doesn't sound like the same reimbursement for participation fee help. It sounds like, Nichelle, do you know more about this? Can we invite her up?
Hi. It is a Form B resolution of support for the school board to support East High School in pursuing funds to help support training for athletic directors, coaches. It's outlined in the agenda, which I don't have in front of me right now. Just in the wording of the agenda item, what the funds are being requested for. It's to support training, and like I said, I don't have it in front of me. I apologize.
But then, Nichelle, now this does connect with me. I think this was in a packet last month.
Last month was a Form A resolution for the Minnesota High School League, and that was to offset the cost of the participation fees for students. We had one from both East and Denfeld. This one was just specifically from East High School.
Is there a deadline for this? Could Denfeld still apply for a scholarship for the Minnesota State High School League, Form B?
I would have to check on that. I believe the deadline that this had to be submitted is February 1st, but I would have to verify that. Okay. I received this from Athletic Director Rode, and that's how I got on your agenda.
Just
Member Trinka.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, so it says in the resolution language in the agenda, thank you for pointing us to that it also includes fine art programs. So it's not just athletics, it's also fine arts who will be receiving training?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Or could. Yeah.
Potentially, if they receive those grant funds. It's to offset the cost of any trainings for activities and athletics.
Member Loeffler-Kemp.
And just to clarify, I don't see it being specific to East any place on here or in the attachment. Does it need to be? Just so.
I can make that edit to your agenda for the meeting next week, and also make sure that we include the dollar amount.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next on our agenda is policies. And this we do have maybe some conversation. Our first policy is crisis 5123. We're going to delete, and we're going to recommend a new policy 806. And I believe, is this the first reading of these policies?
Yes, that is correct.
So I'm going to turn it over to you then?
Yeah,
okay.
We have two policies this month. Both are in response to the civil rights audit that we had done back in September. And two suggestions from that audit became the model policy 806, which is an MSBA model policy. The second one is 535. This is not an MSBA model policy. They do not have a policy on this, so we got this through through those that we're working with through the audit process, and are bringing forth that as our template and made some changes to that. So. Starting out with the crisis management policy, if you look at the one for deletion, we did that one on a half page. The new one, based on the feedback that I just closed in front of my computer, hang on one second. is much more robust, totaling probably about 12 pages or so, and it really lays out the details of what our process is. So we have a emergency response crisis manual that we use, and this policy really kind of spells out what's in that binder. The binder is about, it's like 5 inches thick of all the different things that could possibly happen. And at the site level, we have our administrators make sure that their buildings are doing on-site applications. The scope of the audit was really around how we work with students with disabilities, 504 plans, IEPs, and how would we approach them in the event of these different pieces. Our policy really didn't speak to that. But in redoing this and in going through our ALICE work and our school safety team meetings, we knew that there was work to be done with this. So rather than just addressing that little bit, we're doing the whole thing, and we're getting it to where it needs to go. So we did look at the MSBA model policy with this. We also checked with other school districts from around the state to see kind of what theirs looked like, and used those to help us come up with our first reading here. A lot of it is updated language. You'll note that we use the word sites instead of buildings. We've also detailed some of our different strategies, and these match our emergency response crisis manual. And so we have everything spelled out so that it fits real nice, and so you can kind of look one for one on A, B, C, D throughout that and how we respond in different areas. We also updated the language to match the team names that we use in our district.
What names? Team names?
The different team names, yes. And if you notice when you walk into a room, you'll see there's a green pack. This matches with those, so this policy connects all those different pieces together.
Member Oswald?
This is a kind of a nitpicky question, so I apologize in advance. But this policy has a large amount of crossed out predetermined language, and some of those things that are crossed out are part of the legal references quoted at the bottom on page 27. So do we know that we cover all the legal references that are made in there with the language that we are going to include rather than the stuff that's deleted? And the other part of that question is all of those cross references to other model policies that we haven't adopted yet. How do we address that if we're saying that this policy is cross-referenced with this other policy, but we don't have that policy?
Yep, great question. So to answer the first part of the question I believe you're referring to the notes section where it says note more specific information on planning could be, is that the sections you're referring to? Or
I'm referring to everything that's redlined, but not just notes, but there was a section where I saw it covered, well, maybe where it is noted is a majority of them, yes, but there's also things in here that, it says like see rule something or other. I just missed it somewhere. Where did I see that? I don't know. It'd take me forever to find it, but I'm just making sure that what's legally referenced is still included. So.
Okay, yep, I can see one under the fire drill, for example. Like you said, fire drills will be conducted periodically without warning at various times and days under the different circumstances, lunch times and so forth, as it states in the statutes. So what we would do is, it would still meet that. That is part of the legal reference that we would do. That's state law that we'd follow those 5 pieces. So that is accounted for. I can go back though, and I will double check between this reading and the second reading just to make sure we don't have any references that are missed. As for the policy question, that was something I wanted to learn a little bit more about too. Is how do we go about this? What is our practice as we're going from 1,000 series to hundreds series? And
we don't have one.
my understanding is that we have been putting in what the next some of the next policies we'll be working on, because if we did go back and if we did put that policy in there, then I'd need to bring this policy back and we'd end up in this kind of cyclical piece. So in moving to MSBA policy, we use the updated MSBA policy numbers that we'll be moving towards adopting. I think 703 or 903, for example, is one that is in there.
Correct. So if someone references this policy and wants to look up a policy about, since this references how to use peace officers and crisis teams to remove students with IEPs from school grounds, and they would look up the model policy, but we haven't adopted that model policy, how would that apply?
I guess I would look to the board for direction on that. If there's a different way that could be done.
Well, this board member is asking how should we do that. I think that's a valid question. We don't.
Member Loeffler-Kemp?
Yeah, I had a question about the new policy under the section preparation before an emergency, communication, student and parents. So it's 3A2. I was just curious if we're making any changes, how we do make parents aware so it's more consistent from school to school. As it's laid out here, it talks a little bit about how students and parents are made aware could be a little bit different from each building, if I'm reading that right.
So generally, one of the big things with this policy, and this was one of the questions we had kind of going through this, was how do you write a district policy to account for all the different things that a site would need? And really kind of that's what this audit really kind of brought forth in the conversation was when we have students on IEP 504, how do you make a policy that needs to be individualized? And I think that kind of plays with the communication piece too, that we do have standard tools that are building, given the age, given the situation, that different tools may be utilized in that process. So we do have an in-house expert on communication, and so we tend to call her and partner in on that. With these situations, we do kind of have our standard responses, which would be, we'll do like an all call or something like that, or we might do some emails, but it really kind of depends and ends up being a team decision, usually between the assistant superintendent or the superintendent in communications and the building administrator on what the best response would be given the scope of the potential threat or just need for communication that maybe we've seen recently that there is no threat, and just to alleviate those concerns. So the whole policy does kind of read to, it'll say kind of building site plan, and that's consistent throughout that, because at that building level, that's where you see that information teased out. And,
Member Trinka?
Sorry.
Sorry.
And I was going to say that was, and we asked those questions too, and so we checked with some other districts to see if that's what they were using, and that was consistent with their language too.
Member Trinka?
Thank you. I think we didn't finish the conversation that Member Oswald brought up, and I think we need to finish that, because that will impact certainly our second reading, but then also direction moving forward for the district. So will you help me, because I was listening, but you said it better than I could. Could you restate your request for discussion?
My request was that we decide how to handle adopting policies when transitioning to the new MSBA system when it references other model policies that we haven't adopted yet. So, because the new language that we're adopting is relying on other language we haven't adopted. So we need to figure it out.
So can we reference it back to what we currently have adopted and then highlight it that once, because you guys have a tracking sheet for this, right? Like once the policy that's referenced gets updated, then we have to update this policy with the updated reference numbers. So if we reference we have to reference what has been adopted, not what might be adopted, right? So
but there are model policies that are new too that we don't currently have. So
Oh, good
there's
point.
a challenge there. So
Let's adopt them all.
I think we get a policy committee and then we work on that.
That would be my,
Third.
that would be my, comment as well, that, I don't know how often have we done this lately? Haven't we done this quite a bit in this last year that I've been on the board where we have adopted a policy, but we haven't adopted the connecting policies? Not yet? Okay. So then my question would be, couldn't we put on the next agenda, before we adopt anything more new, could we go through and do 413, 501, 506, 532, and 903? And then this packet would be done and move that quickly.
That's the way we've done it in recent years, is to say, okay, everything that's related to this topic, it'll be, 7 policies at once, but they all fit together. Makes the most sense.
And we also have
Behind
to
having a policy committee.
But we also have to remember that these policies are going to reference policies too that we may not. So it's a chain, and it just has to be methodical, I think.
Could there be, again, this is so much work for all concerned, so if we said policy under cross-references, MSBA/MASA Model Policy 413, Harassment and Violence, what is our current policy's number, and couldn't you put that next to it? So our current policy might be 5335. And could you put that somewhere out there so that at least technically we're covered for what policies are there?
I think what I'm hearing is that you're saying kind of put an or statement in there. So it's this policy or this one, so that if we currently have, say, policy, 9300, and it's going to be 930, we could say reference 9300 or 930, and then we wouldn't have to go back and revise it because both numbers would be in there. I think this one, this particular policy, and maybe the next one, are outside of our process that we were doing because it was a product of the audit that happened. And so from MSBA, we have kind of those bundles of these are all the policies that are connected, and this one came through another process, so we didn't necessarily have the bundle. And so I think that's why this one is the first time that we're saying, it doesn't feel right because it's coming from a different process. But I appreciate your attention to detail.
Hi, John.
Hey.
Member Gorham.
So I think Assistant Superintendent Horton, you were looking for direction. I think in this instance, being that this is a priority policy, perhaps this month is our first reading, and we could maybe cycle through the connected policies next month as a first reading. Don't know how much work that is for you. And pass it as a package. If it is a priority, we should have the complementing pieces to go with it, I would think. Otherwise, it may not be.
I can definitely go back. A few of those are already passed and in place. There are a couple that are still standing out there, so I can look to pull for next month those, and we can do a first reading, so that those will follow a month after. I can do that if that's what you got would be most helpful.
So will that come up in conversation on Tuesday and made as a motion, or do we just? Okay.
All right. I will make sure that we have those other policies on the agenda for next month. So we'll have a second reading of these two policies, and then I'll have first readings for those that are not in this one. And if we start running into additional cross-reference questions, then I'll see what I can do and seek feedback.
I just want to clarify, too, that if you look at our agenda, under this new policy 806, crisis management, policy. Is that just a typo? It says attached is policy 806, crisis management policy for the first reading. This policy would replace 8123. Should it be 5123? Do you see where I am? I'm on 2, new policy 806, crisis management policy. Is that a typo? I just don't want it to go into an official minutes.
Are we on the agenda right now?
Yeah, under policies C2.
5123, 5123. Oh, yep. On a keypad, I think the 8 and 5 are right next to each other.
Okay.
I think that is a typo. Yep, we'll make sure we get that one fixed.
So we're going to continue now with C3, new policy 535, disproportionate enrollment.
Yep, we do not currently have a model policy through MSBA that we could use for this one, so they sent us some resources that we could use, and this was a policy that we utilized. We've adopted it largely as is. We've expanded it to read the superintendent or designee because these are conversations that could be happening at a lot of different places, depending on the topic. So that was the only change really done. And this again is a compliance piece through civil rights. We did change the title too.
Superintendent Gronseth?
I just want to note that I think it's unusual that a required policy would not have an MSBA model policy for it. If it's, like the Office of Civil Rights or the Office of Human Rights saying, you need to have this policy, and yet MSBA, the core service that every district in this state uses as a model, doesn't have that model. Unless it's brand new and everyone is going through the process of doing it. So I know that there have been requirements put in place that MSBA hasn't had models for, that maybe we've been waiting for. I just think it's interesting.
Member Oswald.
Thank you for having one of my points taken care of, because that was exactly where I was going. Was that the other point I was going to ask about was under 3A when they're listing after classes are set and students have registered, the superintendent or designee will review enrollment numbers, determine if there's disproportionate enrollment, and will consider what can be changed to decrease or to increase enrollment in classes. Is there other options besides cutting that class in buildings? Because that's the way I'm looking at that sentence is if there isn't enough people, the class gets cut. And that's been pretty straightforward. So is this policy actually getting us to reconsider how we handle disproportionate enrollment, or what is exactly are we talking about with disproportionate enrollment? Because I'm viewing this through a counseling lens, as this was apparently a counseling policy that we're adapting.
And then I think member Sandstead was next.
I'm looking at the paragraph above that, 2C. Just wondering how this works. If a particular class is disproportionately male or female, the district must make sure the situation did not result because of a sex-based counseling, a hostile environment, or the use of discriminatory counseling and or testing methods. What's our plan for actually doing what it says there? How are we going to make sure? Are we doing a survey? Are we, I don't know where the model language, did the model language come from the Human Rights Department? Yeah. It needs to go through MSBA filter so that it actually is useful instead of, yeah. But are we required to have this? Yeah. Is that?
We're required to have a policy by March 1st. That doesn't mean that we couldn't revisit the policy once MSBA perhaps.
Develops one.
Yes.
Yeah, like they did with the data practices.
Yep.
Took their sweet time. But perhaps we could make a stab at making this a little bit more friendly for ourselves. I'm not volunteering, sorry, but I suggest it.
Member Trinka?
Thank you. This to me seems like square peg, round hole. And I was reading it over the weekend and I thought I was maybe just caffeine deficient. But it seems pretty clear to me that it was taken from the pre-career and technical programs piece. If we're talking about disproportionate enrollment, and if this is ordered by the Office of Human Rights, to me this needs to be much more inclusive of the groups that we're considering that we know we have disproportionate enrollments with. For example, under 3B, number 8, support training of staff members or administration on non-traditional enrollment, particularly on strategies to engage female students in STEM courses. Yes, that's important, but is that all inclusive of disproportionate enrollment? And I would argue no. So I would agree with Member Sandstead that this does need to go through the MSBA filter. And if we have something that needs to be done by March 1st, I would encourage somebody to volunteer to maybe work with administration on putting together a much more, maybe we could work with the equity committee on this, a much more comprehensive policy, because I would not feel comfortable supporting this the way it's written.
Member Oswald?
I have my previous question hanging out there, but I also am wondering if instead of adopting this language, we couldn't adopt one of those, 2-sentence kind of policies that we have done before in previous iterations that we're trying to change now until we get a better grasp on what the policy has to say? Or is this the language that they said we have to use?
Member or Superintendent Grantz?
Thank you. I'll try to catch up. I think I'm going to lose a couple pieces along the way. First of all, I think that the language I'm going to go to your first question. I didn't take the language as saying that we would cut the class and not run it. I think it was if a class had disproportionate enrollment, that we would develop some strategies for improving the disproportionality of that. I think part of it is that there's Title IX language included, because Title IX was one of the things that they were auditing for when they visited us. So I think I hear a combination of language that's in Title IX statute and in disproportionality concerns. And instead of making them all-inclusive, they've kind of kept those pieces. I just recognize the language from both. This is the model that they sent us as an example of what they are requiring from us. So we can feel free to adjust this language. What I don't know is what pieces are they saying, you really, really need this piece, but you don't need this piece, because this was the sample that they sent.
Member Horton, I'll go to you first,
Okay.
and then I'll go to Trinka.
I can respond to that a little bit. I did call them on this policy because I had the same question about why doesn't MSBA have that policy, and so I tried to get a little bit more information on it as well. They said that this is the model policy that they have shown people that has been most widely used and adopted. It was in response to Title IX that's the big piece with this, and so that's why I think you're seeing that heavy component in there. After this reading, I'm going to be submitting back to them any language in both of these, because if we pass a policy that they don't find acceptable, then we are out of compliance. So when we make our changes, I'll be sending them back between the first and second reading. So it is possible I can make changes to them and offer suggestions, and they'll look over it and say, you're still in compliance with this, or they may say, you've now taken this out of compliance because it does have to address these issues. So I can definitely come up with something and see what they say. They're here to support us with that, but yeah, this was the policy that they gave us, really, to say that you're missing. And I wasn't even quite sure what number to give it. And Melinda was wonderful to help us find 535 is a great number.
Member Trinka.
Thank you. Well, if you're making a list of what you're going to feed back to them, first of all, I think we need to define what we mean by disproportionate enrollment, because that could mean something different to multiple people. I think that there's actually I think that there's bias just in the way that this is written, and so to me, again, I would not feel comfortable voting to move forward because I see privilege just like seeping through this document, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. I would say for my previous example about engaging female students in STEM courses, to use that as a for example, things like make sure course catalogs and brochures are periodically reviewed for bias. If people don't understand their own biases, how are they going to review those things for bias? And then this is really nitpicky, but I've been noticing it for the last year, and it kind of bugs me. We switch off and on whether we capitalize the D in district and the S in superintendent, and so I would just ask for some consistency on that front. I'm a former copywriter, so it bugs me. Thanks.
Member, Kirby.
Thanks. I would like to echo Member Trinka. If we're against disproportionate enrollment, we must be for proportional, and that's not defined. Again, I don't know what that is. And who determines if bias is present? If one person says it's biased, does that mean it is? So I think there needs to be more specific guidelines in this for a lot of reasons.
Member Sandstead.
Yeah, I think it needs a definition section for sure. And I would suggest that perhaps Assistant Superintendent Horton, if you could send it out to us in a Word format, some of us might just be engaged enough to do track changes, and that might be a little bit more helpful to you than just shooting things at you right now, perhaps, especially if you give us a deadline for feedback.
Member Oswald.
I would also like to understand better what they mean by counseling materials. Are we talking, is it materials that you're using to educate in everyone? Or is it counselor specific, and what determines it to be a counselor versus counseling materials? That's, ensure compliance with our counseling practices. What do they mean? I don't know, and I'm an educator. I don't know what that means.
Superintendent Gronstedt.
Could I just say that your conversation sounds very much like our conversation when we saw this policy as well. Kind of like, all of the same things are coming out, so it doesn't surprise me because you're on top of things.
If all they're looking for is blind compliance, I mean, they can let that be known. If we just need to be rubber stamped to say that we have this on the books, but how are we going to be held accountable to it by their office is the bigger question, if that's the case.
Member Sandstead.
Well, and I also think that some of this would be really good and useful. Like, for instance, our Pathways to Teaching program is geared towards helping get our district more diversity in our teaching staff, and so making sure that we have a representative group of kids enrolled in that class would be great. But this doesn't exactly say that, and so I think if we could make this actually work for the goals that we're trying to achieve, which is, I think, which is consistent with what the Human Rights Department wants us to do. That would be a great thing. This would be a good tool for us to have, and we can build in some, references to how we're going to be using the data to make sure that we're in compliance. But right now, it doesn't exactly do that.
Member Trinka.
So I know that if we have to have a policy in place by March 1st, we have to have 2 readings, blah, blah, blah. I get that. I think I would like to see our EAC team involved in part of this too. So I'm wondering if it would be worthwhile, since one of the primary charges of the school board is to review and approve policy. If it would be beneficial for you, Assistant Superintendent, to have a board member on the phone with you when you talk to them, so we can say, and maybe ask for an extension and explain to them why we as a board are asking for an extension, because if I were them and people were having really thoughtful discussion about how we're looking for this to comply with what they're looking for, that would be a plus. So I don't know if that's, I don't know, I want to be cognizant about not overstepping boundaries, but this is one of our primary charges, so it does seem like having some support from your board might be beneficial.
Yeah, I did ask if I said that on both of them, I thought that there was opportunity to really have great, robust discussions. On the other one with the implementation of Alice, and could we extend some of those deadlines and stuff? And I got a very polite no back. We could ask again. In terms of EAC, I would love to see EAC take a look at some of these things. As EAC is currently functioning, they can't get a quorum, therefore they have no ability to do anything or put anything on an agenda, unfortunately. So that group is in the middle of trying to reset some of that and do some of that work, but it's probably going to take them a little longer. So unfortunately, I don't have that resource right now. But that doesn't mean that there might not be ways to get input in other ways. Just EAC itself as an entity might not be our answer at this time.
Member Sandstead.
I think it's much more important for us to do this in a way where it's correct and useful for us than it is to just rubber stamp something that doesn't function. And ultimately, we will provide them with a copy of what we create, which will be much better than what they have put together. And so they will be welcome to send that to other districts. And so they're going to benefit in the end as well. So if I were you, I wouldn't ask for an extension of the March deadline. I would let them know that we are working on it and we are going to come up with a very good policy, and we will get it when it's ready, and we will send it to them as soon as possible. That's what I would do.
Superintendent Grunza.
One of the things that I wanted to note is the title change that we made. When they did the review, they were looking specifically at how we were enrolling students in our career tech ed program, and so it was specific to those courses and not as broad as we've made it with our title. So maybe that's part of it too, is that we need to make it more specific to our career and tech ed programs for this policy. That's one of the things we can work through as well.
Member Gorham.
I guess if part of my goal is to provide some direction, I would rather be non-compliant and have robust conversation and get this right than be compliant and rubber stamp this. If we're trying to avoid bias, I mean, what's the point of this then? And that can be a message directly from me. That's bogus.
Just a comment too, I read this over the weekend and then I Googled it to see where this was coming from, and I just got a hit that Proctor High School has this same policy word for word, and it's in their board policy. It'd be interesting to reach out to Proctor to see, if we're going to meet up with somebody else at MSBA, maybe we'll seek out a Proctor school board member and see what their conversation was and what they did with this. Now when Superintendent Grunza sheds light on the fact that when they came in to do their review with us, they were looking specifically at our career and tech, programs. Well, I guess there is some understanding of that. If you look at our automotive offerings or our medical classes, maybe they see that there's some disproportionality. And do we need to encourage and offer, and our teachers encouraging with where we're supporting? And but this is really, again, from a teacher lens, like Member Oswald, it's really, my lens is really fraught with, we are just this this policy is setting us up to fail and be open to their coming back and saying, you're still on our list of not being compliant because you put the policy in. Even if we craft a really good one, we better craft a really good one, because there are some, there are inherent reasons why students take the classes they take. And I don't know, it'll be interesting to get on top of presentations and counseling materials and presentations that teachers and staff and people make in their classrooms to encourage selection. Are we focused more in the high school, or do we look at our elementary and say, well, if there's 14 boys and 6 girls in this classroom, we've got to change that?
Superintendent Gronseth and I attended the Mesa Back to School Fall Conference, and we attended a session in which they spoke to doing this type of work. And it was about a 7-8 year process that they shared with us about being intentional about it. And they started out with students in the elementary and tried to follow them up. They said in order to get more students in AP classes, at the high school level, we have to start with earlier interventions and supports there. And so theirs was really about a journey of many, many, many years, and being committed to that for many, many years. So I guess if that helps with some of the context for the work potentially ahead with this, that was their journey, at least.
Do we get any guidance from, is this Department of Human Rights? Do we get guidance as to the policy that we do adopt eventually when they come back and visit with us again, and are we then forever kind of reviewed by them to see where this is going?
They provided a report after their visit that had recommendations. We then signed an agreement, I guess it's been a couple of months now, that we would have this work completed by March 1st. They provided examples and language and, handrails that needed to be fixed and chairs. I was just going to say. And so we're just in the process of completing that checklist of work. They'll come back again after that March 1st deadline to recheck the items that they noted to make sure that we're compliant. And hopefully then we're good for a while until we're randomly selected again.
Well, thank you. Your closing comments.
I guess I have a question then for some direction. So I'm hearing you say that in terms of this being a disproportionate enrollment policy, you're not happy moving forward with it and want to do it right. I also heard at one point an acknowledgement that the scope of what they're looking at for compliance is through a Title IX lens, which is a sliver of it's part of disproportionate enrollment, but it's a smaller piece of it. Are we looking to turn this into a larger disproportionate enrollment piece as we've titled it, or can we narrow the title? Is the title maybe misleading, and do we focus on compliance within that piece of it and then consider making it more broad? So, how do we kind of want to approach that?
Member Sandstead.
I would say we should go broad, is my thought. Why have one policy regarding just the title slice versus all disproportionality?
Member Trinka?
I would say my inclination would be to do a both and. So to use this policy specific to meet the requirements that were set forth from our audit. So changing the title and really tightening up the language to make it very clear that this is specific to Title IX funding and making sure that all that language cross-references with the Title IX funding. But then I think, I agree with Member Sandstead that we should then also work to create a disproportionate enrollment umbrella policy that speaks to the entire district. And that would include a lot of the points that were brought up earlier.
Member Oswald?
I would just point out, I also found that Hayfield has the exact same. Hayfield. Yep. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I went to undergrad with somebody from Hayfield. But anyway, their title is Policy and Procedure for Monitoring and Identifying Disproportionate Enrollment Counseling and Pre-Career and Technical Programs. And Proctor has identified 402.1. Not saying we have to change 335, but that's where they put it. They did. So, but for my own purposes, answering your question, I think broad is better because this is all potentially very good stuff that can be applied to more than just career and technical programs.
My concern is enforcement. If we go broad and we put this policy for all, I mean, it's a good direction to go, but how much can we determine, maintain? We're starting to just get a handle on equity and looking through lenses of our toolkit, and I just don't know if going broad right now to fit to go with the Human Rights Commission and what they want is. Sometimes I just want to say, let's stay small right now and give them what meets their definition and then go forward with more. I also have a question just about Title IX. Isn't Title IX just related to athletics or no? Title IX is in academics as well. And so Title IX is only, if they were focused on Title IX, are they really only focused about disproportionate enrollment between males and females?
That was just a portion of their review as Title I, or not Title I, Title IX, wrong title, sorry. It was about access overall. That was just one piece of it. Now, when I said that, I just said I recognize some of the language pieces from Title IX and other areas from non-discriminatory statutes, and so I think there's pieces of both in here.
Member Trinka.
Yeah, I think what we set forth in policy is what we set forth in who we want to be. And so I think that if we want to be an equitable school district, it needs to be codified in policy. So I think there's no time like the present. In fact, it probably should have been done before. So that's why I support us working on a larger disproportionate enrollment policy for the district.
I agree. I'm smoked. Thanks. Well, I was thinking we would just, do a little bit, and then you really bring us back to the full picture and what we're about, so I get it. I know. It's a good thing. You spoke it well. I just, I suppose it's my being in the district or classroom, and just this is really overwhelming, and who's going to do all of this work, but I guess we'll have, yes. Our leaderships are good leaders, so that's good. More discussion? Any discussion? Have we given you enough feedback?
Sorry, I was just pointing out that there was 2 number 8s listed in here, but also in the other schools that have the same policy, they all just have 2 8s. So, just saying. Yep. Truly.
Where do they place Thanksgiving on their school calendar?
I'll check it out.
Would you like any? I can definitely call and let them know what the direction that we want to go, and I think they'll think that that's exciting. Do you want feedback on the drawbacks of choosing to be non-compliant? Yes. Okay.
You don't want more legal fees.
I'm not sure Member Sandstead cares. She's just a rebel with the cause. But it would be helpful. But then also if you could send us this in a Word document, because we could potentially be in compliance if we put some time and energy into it between now and our second reading.
Superintendent Grantz.
Are you done talking about policies yet?
I think we were, yeah.
Okay. I have, because we were having conversations about it earlier, so I've really been trying to train myself on proper mic usage. Thank you, Member Lofall. These mics are designed for us to be like sitting, kind of regular in our chairs and having some distance, because when we get too close to them, it really gets echoey and distorted. And so if we just kind of leave them and not pay attention to them, we can hear it.
Any comment with that? And then your back won't get so. Yeah, Jeff
the
is.
mics forward and how we lean into them, and then it does. I've been trying to pay attention to, because I'm just as. Yeah. I've been trying to pay attention because I know that I do that too, and one of the things we've been noticing as we go into classrooms is the sound systems that we have are very similar. Teachers turn them up until they can hear them themselves, but to everyone else in the room, it's like, wow. And so you don't necessarily have to hear it yourself for it to be the same volume across the whole space.
But it is so natural for us to lean forward. I have a little card that I usually put on by my mic that just says, "Lean back, Jill. Lean back."
It's the opposite of on stage,
Yeah, I know.
On stage, they say, hold it closer. Here we say, keep your distance.
So moving forward, we have an extended trip request. Then that's the one that's for the Denfeld Orchestra, and then we just have 5 diploma requests to celebrate and congratulate. And we'll do that again on Tuesday night. So this concludes our Education Committee meeting, I believe. But good discussion, and I thought, the policies were, in our future, we do have policies coming up, so let's keep going. She always has policies. I know. And,